Namaskar. Hello and welcome to P Guru's channel. I'm your host Sri Iyer. This is DGI-362 Daily Global Insights, and joining me is my co-host Sridhar Chityalaji. Sridharji, Namaskar and welcome to P Guru's channel.
Namaskar, good morning to you, and we're looking forward to an exciting Tuesday.
Sridharji, this heading is the world heading towards an economic tsunami. This has come about because we are seeing some alarming conditions happening, whether it is UK or Europe or the United States, plus China too. And Jamie Dimon has looked at a few things and he has weighed in also. Can you elaborate what Jamie Dimon's thoughts are? Because he's been very, very accurate about previous recessions and so on and so forth, sir.
Yes, indeed. I think it's a great segue. Well, for the first time, Jamie Dimon has come out in public and made a statement that if things are not stemmed, we are looking towards a potential economic catastrophe. While the economies may sound good right now, but you need to look at the future and what are the headwinds that the world and United States more specifically is confronting. He has identified 4 specific drivers for this. First and foremost, the runaway inflation, which is continuing to run unabated. So I think that's the first driver that he has stated, which we all know. The second that he has stated, which is very important, for us to recognize, is the rising interest rates. The rising interest rates has direct consequences in terms of the earnings of the potential earnings of the companies. So therefore, the rising interest rates continues to pose a significant kind of a problem as the rates begin to climb as we step into the end of the year and moving into the next year. So that's the second driver that he has pointed out. The third that he has pointed out, which is very, very important, we probably will do a separate story in our weekend market summary insights. It's called as the quantitative tightening. We have all heard of quantitative easing, which is namely the Fed intervening and buying government securities, mortgage-backed securities to provide liquidity to the market. He says, which is very true, which people have not factored in. So the tightening or the quantitative tightening, which means the pullback. So as treasury instruments mature, mortgage-backed securities mature, the Fed is not going to buy back and provide liquidity. It's going to allow them to lapse. So you're going to have a liquidity crunch coming up as a result of the Fed tightening that is likely to happen. And no one has modeled what the consequences of it in the event of such a situation where you have inflation, you have credit, and you have quantitative tightening. And finally,
go ahead, sir. Yeah.
And finally, and then I'll let you, finally, he has touched on Russia-Ukraine. He says this continuing Russia-Ukraine situation is really causing the havoc and no one is trying to stop. And he has predicted a situation of tight to a very bad landing in 6 to 9 months as we head into next year. So this is the rationale, and there are others, but I'll let you first ask me the question, and then we'll get into the others.
Sridharji, Jerome Powell has always been considered a very steady hand. He was there right through or for the most part of Trump presidency, and then he has continued on under Biden. Now, during the COVID, he managed it tremendously. He didn't, there was so much. I wouldn't say quantitative easing, but it was something much more than that, because the PPP was amazing amount of money that was put in people's hands because they just couldn't go to work. We have managed that. Now, why do you think that this is going so haywire? Is it Powell that's the problem, or is it something else?
Well, first and foremost, I think that I think we have touched on this, but for the sake of repetitiveness or reaffirmation, why is you touched on a very important point? COVID required a monetary and fiscal response. The monetary response was when there is no demand, you need to stimulate demand by putting more money in the hands of the people. So, what was the monetary tool that was applied? 0% interest rate. They perfect the interest rates back to zero. What was the fiscal stimulus that was given? That is programs such as what you alluded to, unemployment insurance, more specifically PPP, where jobs were protected for those companies, small businesses, which protected jobs till a specific period, they were given incentives. So two things happened: job protection as well as the cash infusion into small businesses to drive. So that worked. But we are in a very unusual situation where the issue is not monetary, but the issue is actually fiscal. It's the supply side. So, without saying in those words, Jamie Dimon touched on the point of Russia Ukraine war, but he also made the point that they were too late in raising interest rates. They kept the rates very low. Now they are raising rates at an abnormal pace, whether the market has the capacity to absorb it. And if not, then that could be another tipping point for going into a recession. So these are the things that further substantiates in terms of your specific question.
And Diamond said that he expects the market to contract by about 20%. And he also said that Europe is perhaps already under recession. I just wanted to add to what you said, sir. Now let's take a look at Europe. If Bank of England is saying that these are asymmetric market conditions and it is going to expand bond market intervention. Can you explain to our viewers in layman terms what is bond market intervention, sir?
Yes. Before I close, I want to make a very important point. 20% from today, which simply implies that we were 4,700s as we finished S&P in end of 2021. We could be around 2,800, 2,900. That's almost 2,000 points down. So that's a catastrophic situation for markets, and people have to kind of prepare themselves, and whatever strategies they want to adopt, they need to adopt, not ignore it. So that's an important point for our viewers to factor into account the consequences of this important decision or announcement that Jamie has made. Now, coming to the fiscal intervention, this is exactly the quantitative easing. You see, two things that has happened. One is the UK went the reverse, which is namely, they said that the only way we can tame inflation is because people were suffering from significant amount of rise in energy bills. I'm not able to tackle the supply side. What can I do? I can give more cash in the hands of the people so they can pay their bills. So there was a fiscal stimulus which worldwide got condemnation. And again, Jamie, in his interesting observation, he should give the benefit of doubt to the UK government. Now, this is causing some kind of a hiccup on the supply side, monetary supply side within the Britain. So what does Bank of England do? It says, no, I'm not doing monetary tightening. That is going to be problematic. But for 3 days, I believe that I will buy back what they call gilt, government-linked instruments. And so we'll buy back the gilt and we'll buy other securities to provide liquidity to the market to potentially avoid financial distress. So markets need money, markets need liquidity. UK is in a liquidity crunch, and the Bank of England is intervening the opposite way to rest of the markets.
And let's take a quick look at what is happening between Russia and Ukraine following the bombing of Kiev and many other cities. Now, the Biden administration is promising a lot more weaponry and also a missile shield to Ukraine. Sridharji, isn't this some sort of an escalation? Should they not be looking at how best to sort of, okay, you made your point and we made our point, let's sit down and talk it over?
Believe it or not, strangely, only two countries are talking some kind of peace. That's India and China, trying to tell Russia you got to de-escalate. Whereas Mr. Biden is suggesting, I'll give you more weaponry and I will also provide you the missile shield because he used missiles to attack. This is further escalation of the violence rather than trying to bring restriction, rather trying to bring a resolution to the problem that we already have. And this is not the right approach that the Biden administration needs to take. They need to bring the parties together to resolve this so the world can benefit rather than the present path, which is a disaster.
And the G7 is meeting in an emergency session to deal with these missile strikes. And one of the targets of these missile strikes was the Ukraine power grid. And we talked about this yesterday, Sridharji. We said that the western half of Ukraine is probably hit. How bad is the situation today, sir?
The situation is bad. The power supply is cut off. And, there's both civilian casualties. The grid is off. And so, therefore, effectively, Ukraine has stated, sorry, no power supply. And remember, this is one of the things that it was what we call as a triangulated grid, which connected Russian, Belarus, as well as the Ukrainian grid. For time immemorial, Ukraine has been trying to get out of this triangulation, and which they, to some extent, achieved it. And by end of the year, they were planning to increase their supply on their own and earn precious foreign exchange earnings, as well as to provide much needed electricity to Europe. Now that's gone.
Bad news for them, I guess, and we'll have to see how this plays out. Now, China is again beginning to tighten its COVID controls as new COVID cases are spiking. Is this going to be again those zero COVID things, sir? Shut down of the entire city?
Well, they're still under zero COVID policy. So therefore, it is going to be even more controls and scrutiny, which implies quarantines and so on. So I almost am beginning to think, I'm sure that they must be aware of some of this, emerging situation or the emerging influx of these COVID cases. Because what I am beginning to wonder is this a coordinated supply choke that is being applied? With China shut down, you're going to have effectively a supply choke because China is the global manufacturing house, right? Nothing is moving and nothing is leaving. And I think we know that a considerable amount of shipments has been slowed from China. So you have a supply choke on the products. Then you have a supply choke on the energy side from Russia. And you have logistical issues in many countries because many ports are just trying to return back to normal. So we are witnessing a very unusual situation of whatever supply issues needs to be managed, that we're being systematically being taken out, Sriji. So it's very worrying sign as to where we are heading.
And looking at Iran, many of its oil workers have joined the protests. Sridharji, how do you see this thing playing out? This is much bigger than what originally started out to be, sir?
It's very worrying because it seems to have it's caught on like a wildfire. Obviously there are some external forces which are impacting. Kurdish region has 3 major oil grids. And if these workers are walk off, Iran will get added to the supply chain in terms of lack of availability of crude from these oil grids. So what does that do? It only means skyrocketing prices. So when you look at the three geopolitical situations, you are in a worse situation, Sriji, in terms of the energy supply and energy production.
And to add fuel to fire, Bob Menendez, a senator in the United States Senate, has now said that the United States should halt supplying weapons to Saudi Arabia. This is in connection with the OPEC, I'm taking it, sir.
It is, because it is very much connected to West Asia. So if Iran has oil workers striking, now Saudi and UAE and Russia have done OPEC plus, they're part of OPEC plus, they've done the cut. The last thing that you need is to tell the Saudis, we are not going to provide security and we are not going to be supplying weaponry to you. Recall you asked me, we discussed this point, which is namely what's going to happen to Yemen. So it doesn't look like United States is going to be supporting. So how will you think Saudi will respond? Okay, no problem. Okay, we're going to choke you again. So we're going to do further production. So politicians in United States are not making things easy, and they're making most unwarranted comments at the most inappropriate time, Sriji.
And lastly, India and Australia highlight the importance of rules-based international order, freedom of navigation in international waters, while Indian foreign minister is asserting the rationale for India-Russia cooperation, India is still perceived as an attractive destination for investors with an economy in better shape relative to other countries. Sir, you can comment on this and we can call it a wrap.
Well, I think the first and foremost, there's a very interesting and positive meeting which happened in between India and Australia. Remember, Australia is a Quad member. When External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar was there, the press pressed Dr. Jaishankar on what India's position on Russia is, and basically said, West chose the wrong partner during the Cold War. As far as India is concerned, India has a sensible partnership with Russia, and it provides all the critical military equipment and infrastructure. You need to go back and see whether your decisions were right rather than questioning on our decisions. That was his statement. But in the end, both Australia and India consider themselves as part of Quad partners in a joint journey. So how do I wrap it up? India is still a pretty good economic destination because the economic factors are being managed relatively better to many places. But the continuing drift where we are heading could also put India in troubled waters as we look in the next 3 to 6 months, Sriji.
Thank you very much, sir. And that brings to close today's episode. Please do like, share, subscribe, and comment on our DGI episodes. Your input is very valuable for us. Please also click on the bell button for notification. And if you feel like our research was good, consider donating using the super thanks button. Thank you very much, Sridharji. We'll be back again tomorrow. Namaskar.
Thank you. Namaskar. Have a